The day Earth was attacked, everything seemed ordinary. The sky was clear, the sun was shining, and people were going about their daily lives, unaware that an unimaginable disaster was about to unfold. No one could have predicted that their world would be shattered in an instant. It started with the first shockwave. Silent at first, then suddenly crashing over the Earth, followed by an explosion so massive it rattled every building. Across the globe, people stopped what they were doing and looked up, confused and frightened. The sky itself seemed to tear open, revealing something enormous above them. It wasn't a storm, it wasn't an aircraft, it was something far worse. The Torvax, a ruthless alien race, had descended upon Earth with one mission: to conquer and enslave humanity. Their fleet, hidden by cloaking technology, had silently positioned themselves in orbit, ready to strike. And when they did, they came with brutal force. Within minutes, they disabled Earth's defense systems with their advanced eye-controlled weapons, rendering Earth's military powerless. Earth's best soldiers were caught off guard, their weapons useless against the overwhelming force of the Torvax. The world was thrown into chaos. Cities were bombarded from above with orbital strikes, burning entire blocks to the ground. Humans, unprepared for the sophistication and might of their alien invaders, had no choice but to watch in helpless terror. Massive explosions lit up the night sky, signaling the complete collapse of the human defense system. Buildings crumbled, and in the streets, people screamed, running for cover as alien forces began their ground assault. Tanks, robots, and AI-controlled drones stormed through the streets, leaving destruction in their wake. On the ground, the human military tried to respond, but their weapons were no match for the alien invaders. They had shields that absorbed all incoming fire, while their own weapons disintegrated everything in their path. Soldiers fought bravely, but it was clear they were losing. The Torvax's superiority was undeniable. They were faster, stronger, and better equipped for war. The humans, with their primitive technology, didn't stand a chance. But there was one thing the Torvax had not accounted for: the resilience of the human spirit. They underestimated humanity. They thought the destruction of Earth would be an easy task, but they didn't know what humans were capable of when pushed to the edge. At the heart of the invasion was General Vrak, a ruthless Torvax commander, whose voice echoed through the corridors of his flagship as he oversaw the destruction. His words were cold and calculated. "Prepare to break the human resistance," he ordered, his gaze fixed on the screens showing Earth's cities burning below. He had come to Earth to capture its resources, its rich minerals, its rare technology, and to wipe out its inhabitants, whom he considered weak. The Torvax believed themselves to be the superior race in the galaxy. Humans were nothing more than ants beneath their feet. General Vrak's flagship loomed large in the sky, a symbol of the power and terror the Torvax had brought with them. His fleet, positioned strategically around Earth, blocked any attempt at communication with other planets, ensuring that no help could arrive. The alien forces flooded the Earth's atmosphere, setting up their domination. There was no escape. Human governments fell within hours, and major cities were wiped off the map. In the middle of this devastation, Earth's military had no choice but to retreat. They regrouped in secret, hoping to find a way to fight back. It seemed like humanity had lost, but the Torvax were wrong. They didn't know who they were dealing with. They thought they could crush humanity in a day, but they didn't know the history of resilience, survival, and revenge that ran through the veins of every human being. The Torvax believed their victory was inevitable, but they had overlooked one critical factor. Earth was home to a force far more powerful than any alien army: the human will to fight. The first strike was a devastating blow to Earth, but it also sparked a fire of resistance. Hidden away in underground bunkers and secret locations, a new force was rising. Humans who had once lived normal lives, farmers, engineers, scientists, soldiers, were now coming together to fight for their homes, for their families, and for their future. Among them was Captain Elias Kane, a former soldier who had seen the destruction firsthand. His family was gone, wiped out in the initial wave. But Kane was not ready to give up. His heart burned with the need for revenge. Kane knew the odds were against them, but he also knew that the Torvax had made a grave mistake. They had underestimated humanity. Humans were not just fighters. They were survivors. And now, they were going to show the Torvax what it meant to mess with Earth. As the human resistance began to gather strength, Captain Kane stood at the edge of a ruined city, gazing at the wreckage left behind by the Torvax. He had lost everything, but he had one thing left: his rage, and he was going to use it. Behind him, the shadowy figures of his resistance fighters emerged from the darkness, ready to take back their world. General Vrak had no idea what was coming for him. The Torvax had thought their victory was certain, but this was just the beginning. As the human resistance prepared for its first strike, the tension in the air was palpable. This was the moment they had been waiting for, the moment when they would rise up and show the Torvax that Earth was not to be taken so easily. The suspense builds as Captain Kane and his team of soldiers gather their weapons, preparing for a counterattack. The battle was far from over, and the Torvax had no idea what they had awakened in humanity. The fight for Earth was about to begin, and this time, humans would be the ones on the offensive. The first strike may have been a brutal blow, but it was also the spark that lit the fire of resistance. The humans were not going to roll over. They would fight until their last breath, and they would make the Torvax pay for their mistake. The story had just begun, and it was about to get much more intense. The first part of the story leaves the audience at the edge of their seats, wondering how humanity will fight back. It sets the stage for an epic struggle between the human resistance and the alien invaders, with the stakes higher than ever. The Torvax might have won the first battle, but the war was far from over, and the humans were ready to take revenge. The first strike may have been a devastating loss, but it also ignited a fire in the hearts of humanity. Earth was not going to fall without a fight. Across the planet, a resistance group began to form. They called themselves the Shadow Legion, comprised mostly of survivors from both civilian and military backgrounds. The Shadow Legion was a ragtag group of individuals who had lost everything in the Torvax brutal invasion. But they were not broken. Instead, they had transformed into fighters, strategists, and rebels who would stop at nothing to avenge their fallen world. At the heart of this resistance was Captain Elias Kane. He had once been a soldier, a protector of his country. But now, after losing his wife and daughter in the Torvax attack, he was something more. He was a man on a mission fueled by grief, rage, and a burning desire to make the Torvax pay for what they had done to his people. Captain Kane's past was one of tragedy, but it had made him stronger. He was no longer just a soldier. He was the leader of the Shadow Legion, and under his command, the resistance would take the fight to the Torvax. The Legion's first task was simple, yet crucial. They needed to fight back in a way that would send a message to the Torvax. But they had one major problem. How could a small, outgunned group of humans take on an alien fleet that had already crushed their strongest defenses? The answer lay in human ingenuity and cunning. The Torvax had advanced technology, yes, but they were arrogant. They didn't believe that humanity had the capability to pose a threat. The Legion knew that they would have to fight smart, not just hard. Their first plan involved using the Torvax's own technology against them. The Shadow Legion had managed to salvage some of the cloaking devices that the Torvax had used during the initial invasion. These devices, normally used to hide their ships from detection, could now be repurposed to turn the human ships invisible. The Legion's new goal was to use these cloaked ships to strike at the heart of the Torvax fleet, without being detected. Captain Kane stood before a group of his commanders in a makeshift command center, the dim light from their holographic screens casting shadows over their faces. His eyes were cold, but filled with determination. He spoke in a voice that left no room for doubt. "This is it. Our chance to show them we're not going down without a fight. We'll use their own technology to attack them where they least expect it. The room was silent, the weight of their mission hanging heavily in the air. But Kane's confidence was infectious. We will hit them fast, hit them hard, and leave them wondering who's behind the strike, he added. The plan was risky. It would take every ounce of their strength, skill, and timing to pull it off. The humans' cloaked ships would infiltrate the Torvax fleet, targeting a transport ship that carried valuable supplies for their invasion force. The goal was simple: destroy the transport ship and send a message that humanity would not go down without a fight. The Shadow Legion was ready. As they prepared for the mission, the anticipation was palpable. Every member of the Legion knew what was at stake. They had nothing left to lose and everything to gain. The Torvax had underestimated them once, but now they would see just how dangerous humans could be. The strike was set to take place at midnight. The moon was barely a sliver in the sky, the perfect cover for their cloaked ships. The ships, designed with stealth in mind, moved quietly through the atmosphere. The Torvax, who were monitoring the skies with their advanced scanners, were completely unaware of the human presence. It was a perfect opportunity. As the cloaked ships neared their target, the tension among the Shadow Legion members grew. They had only one chance to make this work. One mistake could cost them everything. Captain Kane stood at the helm of the lead ship, his hands steady on the controls. His mind was focused, thinking not only of the mission but also of the people he had lost. This was for them. This was for Earth. The target, an enormous Torvac transport ship, loomed ahead. It was heavily guarded, surrounded by smaller fighter ships, but none of them seemed to notice the human ships approaching in the shadows. The Legion had trained for this moment, and they knew exactly what they needed to do. The stealth ships moved in, closing the gap between them and the transport ship. In the silence of space, the tension was unbearable. Then, as they got into position, Captain Kane gave the signal. Now, with precision, the cloaked ships deactivated their invisibility field, emerging into full view just as the Torvac transport ship passed by. The alien ships were too slow to react. The first salvo of missiles launched, striking the transport ship's hull. The explosion was immense, a brilliant flash of light in the blackness of space. The Torvac ship trembled as it was hit, the force of the blast sending shockwaves through the surrounding fleet. The Resistance had succeeded in their first strike, but the job wasn't finished yet. As the Torvac transport ship began to break apart, the humans didn't hesitate. They launched their next wave of attacks, targeting nearby fighter ships that tried to retaliate. The humans were on the offensive now, and the Torvacs were caught completely off guard. Back on Earth, the Torvac commanders were scrambling. General Vrak, the alien commander responsible for the invasion, stood before his fleet, his expression one of fury and disbelief. How could this be? How did they do this? He demanded. The Torvacs had underestimated humanity's resourcefulness and determination. They had thought the humans would be crushed easily. But now, they were facing the consequences of their mistake. The Shadow Legion's first strike had sent a shockwave through the Torvac forces. It was only a small victory in the grand scheme of things, but it was enough to make the Torvacs rethink their strategy. The humans had shown that they could strike back, and they would. This was no longer just a war for survival. It was a war for revenge. And humanity was just getting started. Captain Kane stood aboard his ship, watching the debris of the destroyed transport ship float in the void of space. His face was grim, but there was a fire in his eyes. "This is just the beginning," he muttered to himself. "We'll make them pay for what they've done." The Shadow Legion had made their first strike, and it was a success. The humans had proven they could fight back, and the Torvacs had learned a valuable lesson. Never underestimate humanity. The battle was far from over, but now the Torvacs had a new enemy to fear. And this time, they would not win so easily. After the success of their first strike, the Shadow Legion knew that their small victories would not be enough to win the war. The Torvax were still an overwhelming force, their advanced technology and massive fleets intimidating. But the humans had something the Torvax didn't: sheer determination and the ability to adapt. Captain Kane, with his burning desire for revenge, pushed his team to think bigger. They had only one option left: to build a weapon so powerful that it would turn the tide in their favor. The Shadow Legion had already proven that they could strike at the heart of the Torvik Empire, but now they needed something that could cripple the invaders' most powerful assets: their shields. The Torvak's advanced technology, which included nearly impenetrable energy shields, had been the key to their dominance over humanity. No matter how many attacks the humans launched, their weapons could never break through the shields. It was as if the Torvax had an impenetrable wall around them, making them virtually unstoppable. To overcome this challenge, the Shadow Legion's brilliant scientists, working day and night in secret laboratories hidden deep beneath the Earth's surface, embarked on a mission to create a weapon capable of disabling these formidable shields. Using the wreckage of destroyed Torvax ships, the scientists began reverse engineering the alien technology. They painstakingly studied the energy signatures, the quantum fields, and the mechanics of the shields. It was a task that required every ounce of their genius and every available resource, but they were determined to succeed. Their solution came in the form of a quantum weapon, something that could destabilize the energy fields of the Torvak shields and render them useless. This weapon was humanity's last hope, and its creation would determine whether or not they could survive the invasion. It was a game changer, and it would be the key to humanity's revenge. The weapon, however, was far from perfect. It wasn't as advanced as the Torvak's technology, and it would take all of the Shadow Legion's resources to make it work. They had one chance to use it, and if it failed, they would be left vulnerable to the full force of the Torvax. But the risks were worth it. Captain Kane knew that if they didn't take this step, they would be crushed. The weapon would either change the course of the war or doom humanity. As the weapon was nearing completion, the Shadow Legion prepared for the next phase of their plan. They would need to infiltrate the heart of the Torvak fleet, and they would do it using their cloaked ships. The Torvaks were still unaware that the humans had developed this weapon, and the element of surprise was crucial. The Shadow Legion would strike at the Torvak flagship, the heart of their operations. If they could disable the flagship's shields and take it down, it would send a powerful message that humanity was no longer a helpless prey to the Torvaks. Captain Kane stood at the helm of the lead ship, staring at the schematics of the Torvak flagship on the holographic display. His mind raced with possibilities, but he was focused. He knew the risks, and he knew the stakes. This mission could either be their salvation or their downfall. The tension in the air was thick as the Shadow Legion prepared for their most dangerous mission yet. The night before the mission, as the team gathered for their final briefing, the weight of what they were about to attempt hung heavily in the room. The soldiers, the engineers, the scientists, they all knew that the fate of humanity rested on their shoulders. There would be no turning back. "This is it," Captain Kane said, his voice steady despite the gravity of the moment. "Tomorrow, we either win this war, or we die trying. We have one shot at this, and we're not going to waste it. Let's make sure the Torvaks know what happens when you mess with humans." The team nodded in unison. They were ready. They had come this far, and there was no turning back. As the cloaked ships made their way towards the Torvak flagship, the feeling of anticipation was palpable. The vastness of space seemed empty, but the Shadow Legion felt the weight of the task at hand. Each member was focused, knowing that failure was not an option. The moment had come. The Torvak flagship loomed ahead, its massive form almost intimidating. The shields surrounding it shimmered with energy, an impenetrable barrier that had kept the invaders safe from countless human attacks. But now, the Shadow Legion had a weapon that could breach those shields. Captain Kane gave the signal: "Activate the quantum weapon." With bated breath, the crew watched as the weapon powered up. It hummed with energy, glowing with the potential of unimaginable destruction. The Shadow Legion's cloaked ships moved into position, their weapons primed. The quantum weapon was locked on to the Torvak flagship's shields. At that moment, everything seemed to stop. The universe held its breath as the weapon fired. A blinding flash of light erupted from the human ship, a surge of energy unlike anything the Torvaks had ever seen. The blast hit the flagship's shields, and for a moment, nothing happened. Then suddenly, the shields flickered. A crack appeared. The Torvaks had never expected this. The human weapon was working. But just as quickly as the shield began to crack, it seemed to regenerate. The energy was fading, but not fast enough. Captain Kane's heart raced. Was the weapon failing? Had the Torvaks discovered a way to adapt? For a brief moment, it seemed like all hope was lost. But then, an unexpected breakthrough occurred. The quantum weapon fired again, and this time, it tore through the shield with explosive force. The Torvak flagship's protective barrier shattered, and the ship was exposed. The humans had done it. The Torvaks had underestimated humanity's ingenuity, their most powerful weapon. Their shield was no longer a guarantee. The flagship was now vulnerable, and the Shadow Legion had a chance to strike at the heart of the Torvak Empire. Now, Captain Kane ordered. The cloaked ships emerged from their hiding places, launching a barrage of missiles and plasma shots at the exposed flagship. The Torvaks scrambled to respond, but it was too late. The humans had breached their defenses, and they were not going to stop. In the midst of the chaos, the Shadow Legion unleashed everything they had. The Torvak flagship, once an unshakable symbol of their superiority, now writhed under the human assault. It began to break apart, piece by piece. The victory was hard-fought, but it was the first true turning point in the war. The Torvaks now knew that humanity was not to be underestimated. The Shadow Legion had destroyed the Torvak flagship, an incredible achievement that would be remembered for centuries. But as the wreckage of the flagship drifted into space, Captain Kane couldn't help but feel that their fight was far from over. The Torvaks were wounded, but they were far from defeated. And there was one thing Captain Kane knew for sure. The fight for humanity's survival was just beginning. The battle was fierce, and humanity was starting to gain the upper hand. The Shadow Legion had dealt a crushing blow to the Torvak flagship, and the tide of war seemed to be turning in their favor. Captain Kane, though scared by the losses, had a new sense of purpose. The revenge they had longed for was now within reach, and the Shadow Legion was ready to fight until the very end. Every soldier, every member of the Legion, was driven by the memory of what the Torvaks had done to their homes and families. But even in their moments of triumph, danger lurked in the shadows, and nothing was ever certain. Amid the success and the burning desire to push forward, a dark twist emerged from within their own ranks. Lieutenant Bonner, once a loyal and brave soldier, began to act strangely. At first, it was subtle. He was distant, speaking less during strategy sessions, and his actions seemed to lack the usual determination. Captain Kane noticed the shift but chose to focus on the immediate threats. They couldn't afford distractions, not now. Yet the shadows of doubt began to creep into Kane's mind. The truth came out in the most shocking way. One night, after a successful raid on a Torvak outpost, the Legion received word of an unexpected ambush. When they reached the coordinates, they were greeted by Torvak soldiers, heavily armed and well prepared. The attack was not just a random encounter. It was a trap. They had been betrayed. And the source of that betrayal was none other than Lieutenant Bonner. The discovery hit like a thunderclap. Bonner, the soldier who had fought beside them through thick and thin, had turned his back on the Shadow Legion. He had joined forces with the Torvaks. The realization spread like wildfire through the ranks. How could one of their own betray them? The question burned in Captain Kane's mind, but the answer seemed irrelevant now. All that mattered was that Bonner had chosen to side with the enemy, and in doing so, he had doomed countless human lives. The betrayal was not just tactical, it was deeply personal. Bonner had been close to Kane, a friend in the chaos of war. They had fought together, suffered together, and shared the same dream of vengeance. For Kane, Bonner's treachery was a painful reminder of the fragility of loyalty in war. People could be swayed, their hearts twisted, and their minds corrupted by promises of power or survival. But for Bonner, it wasn't just a betrayal for personal gain. It was a betrayal that tore at the very fabric of the human cause. The Shadow Legion now had a critical choice. They could confront Bonner, risking their lives to stop him from providing valuable intelligence to the Torvex, or they could wait and regroup, trying to strike a decisive blow against the Torvek forces. But waiting meant allowing Bonner to further sabotage their efforts. The weight of the decision fell heavily on Captain Kane's shoulders. In a moment of clarity, Kane realized that there was only one way to stop the betrayal from spiraling further. They would confront Bonner directly. He would not allow one traitor to destroy everything they had fought for. As the Legion prepared to face Bonner, emotions ran high. For the soldiers, it wasn't just a fight for survival. It was a personal battle. Many had lost family, friends, and comrades to the Torvax. The pain of their losses was raw, and the betrayal by one of their own felt like a wound to the heart. But the Shadow Legion had learned the hard way that they couldn't afford to let emotions cloud their judgment. They had a mission to complete, and Bonner had made his choice. Now, they had to make theirs. The confrontation was inevitable. Bonner, with the full force of the Torvak army backing him, stood ready to face the Legion. The once strong bond between him and the Shadow Legion had shattered, and now they were enemies. Bonner's face, once filled with camaraderie, now reflected the cold, calculating nature of the Torvex. In the heat of battle, as the Shadow Legion stormed the Torvak stronghold where Bonner had taken refuge, the truth of his betrayal became even clearer. Bonner had been promised power and protection, but at what cost? The Torvax had played him, using his desire for revenge against them to manipulate him into turning against humanity. He had fallen into their trap, convinced that by helping the invaders, he would secure a future for himself. Captain Kane, though furious, could not ignore the sorrow that twisted in his heart. Bonner had been a comrade, and despite the betrayal, Kane knew that this fight was as much about saving Bonner's soul as it was about stopping the Torvex. Bonner, for all his mistakes, had been a soldier, and that meant something. The battle between the two sides raged on, explosions shaking the ground as weapons clashed, and soldiers fought with everything they had. And then, amidst the chaos, came the moment that would change everything. Bonner, facing his former comrades, hesitated. For just a moment, he faltered. His eyes, once cold and filled with determination, were now filled with doubt. The truth of what he had done, the consequences of his actions, finally hit him. In that split second, Bonner made a choice. He turned on the Torvax. He knew it was too late to undo the damage he had caused, but there was still a chance to redeem himself. He had to stop the Torvax, even if it meant sacrificing his life. With his last breath, Bonner used the explosives in his armor to detonate a critical part of the Torvak base. The explosion sent shockwaves through the facility, crippling the Torvak's operations and buying the Shadow Legion enough time to escape. Bonner's death was a selfless act of redemption, a final act of courage that saved countless lives. But the emotional toll of his sacrifice was immense. Bonner's death left a hole in the hearts of the Shadow Legion. He had been one of their own, and his betrayal had cut deep. Yet, in his final moments, Bonner had shown them what it truly meant to fight for something greater than oneself. He had given his life not just to destroy the Torvex, but to restore the honor he had lost. The Shadow Legion, now deeply wounded but more determined than ever, knew they could not let Bonner's sacrifice be in vain. They had to finish what they had started. His death had rekindled the fire of their resolve, and they knew that the Torvax had underestimated humanity's will to fight. As the Legion regrouped, Captain Kane stood in front of his soldiers, a sense of solemn resolve in his eyes. Bonner may have made a mistake, but in the end, he chose to fight for humanity. We owe it to him, and to all the others we've lost, to finish this war and make sure the Torvax never hurt us again. And with that, the Shadow Legion moved forward, fueled by the sacrifices of their fallen comrades, ready to strike the final blow. The war was far from over, but the lessons they had learned, the sacrifices they had made, would carry them through to the end. The Torvax had no idea what was coming next. They had underestimated humanity before, and now they would pay the price. The war between humanity and the Torvax had been long, brutal, and full of heart-wrenching sacrifices. Every victory had been hard-earned. Every inch of ground gained had come at a high cost. But the Shadow Legion was no longer just fighting to survive. They were fighting for revenge, for their fallen comrades, for the future of their species. The final battle had arrived, and with it, the ultimate strike to bring the Torvax to their knees. It all started with a massive space battle, a spectacle that could only be described as chaos. The black expanse of space lit up with streaks of laser fire and explosions that echoed across the battlefield, even though there was no sound in the vacuum. The Shadow Legion's fleet, made up of every ship they could muster, was racing towards the heart of Torvac territory. It was a desperate assault, but it was their best shot at ending the war once and for all. The Torvax, knowing that humanity was now a real threat, had gathered their full fleet for the ultimate confrontation. Their ships, enormous and menacing, moved with terrifying precision, their weapons ready to obliterate any human force that dared to challenge them. But the Torvax had underestimated the Shadow Legion. Humanity's will to fight, to survive, had become its greatest weapon. The space battle raged on as the Shadow Legion fought valiantly, launching wave after wave of attacks. Their cloaking devices provided them with a tactical advantage, allowing them to strike the Torvax unexpectedly. But despite their ingenuity and courage, the human fleet was vastly outnumbered. Every victory felt fleeting, and as the fight wore on, casualties began to mount. In the midst of the chaos, Captain Kane led his team on a daring mission, one that would be their last chance to turn the tide. They had to infiltrate the Torvac flagship, the very heart of their fleet, and destroy the AI control system that governed their entire force. The Torvax relied heavily on artificial intelligence, and without it, their fleet would be thrown into disarray. The mission was high risk, but it was the only way. With their cloaked ships, the Shadow Legion's team made their way to the flagship, bypassing Torvac defenses with impressive precision. The interior of the enemy ship was a labyrinth of cold metal corridors, dimly lit by artificial lights. The tension was palpable as every member of the team knew that one wrong move could lead to their deaths. As they moved deeper into the ship, the sense of urgency grew. They were nearing the AI control room, the heart of the Torvac fleet, but they also knew that the Torvax would be ready for them. Suddenly, alarms blared through the ship, and the team was forced to fight their way through. The combat that ensued was nothing short of chaotic. The team was outnumbered, but they fought with the ferocity of a people who had nothing left to lose. Lasers cut through the air, creating arcs of light that illuminated the dark corridors. Explosions rocked the ship as grenades detonated, sending soldiers flying. And in the midst of it all, the human soldiers engaged in hand-to-hand combat with the Torvac forces, their training and grit allowing them to hold their ground against superior technology. It was a battle that tested every ounce of strength, skill, and determination they had. The fight felt endless, but they pushed forward, knowing that the fate of their people rested on their success. And as they reached the AI control room, a wave of dread washed over them. The Torvac's supreme leader, General Vrak, was waiting. The battle for the AI control system was more intense than any they had faced before. General Vrak, a towering figure of strength and cruelty, stood at the heart of the room, surrounded by a force of elite Torvac soldiers. His cold, calculating eyes locked onto Captain Kane's, and in that moment, the two leaders knew what had to happen. Only one would walk away from this. The fight between Captain Kane and General Vrak was brutal and personal. Kane fought with everything he had. His heart, his pain, his need for revenge fueling every move. Vrak, on the other hand, was a master of combat, his strength and tactical genius making him a formidable opponent. The two clashed in a flurry of strikes, each move a battle for survival. In the midst of the fight, the gravity of the situation hit Kane. This wasn't just about him anymore. It was about all the lives that had been lost, his family, his friends, every member of the Shadow Legion who had fallen along the way. He fought not just for revenge, but for the future of humanity. The blows exchanged between Kane and Vrak were like thunder, each one reverberating with the weight of the war they had fought. Blood stained the floor as the two warriors fought on, neither willing to give an inch. Kane's fighting style was relentless, every punch and kick a testament to his training and his rage. But Vrak's power was overwhelming, and Kane was pushed to the brink. At the moment when it seemed like Kane might falter, something inside him snapped. His memories of his fallen comrades, of all the lives lost to the Torvex, surged forward. His determination grew, and with one final powerful strike, Captain Kane disarmed General Vrak. The Torvak leader stumbled, his face twisted in shock as he realized that his reign of terror was coming to an end. Kane didn't hesitate. With a swift and decisive blow, he took Vrak down, ending the life of the man who had caused so much pain and destruction. As the general collapsed, the rest of the Torvak soldiers hesitated, their morale shattered by the loss of their leader. The Shadow Legion seized the moment, and with the AI control system now destroyed, the Torvik fleet began to destabilize. The chaos that followed was nothing short of cinematic. The Torvak ships, once a force of terror, now struggled to stay in formation. Their weapons misfired, and their shields flickered. One by one, their ships fell as the Shadow Legion and their allies launched wave after wave of attacks, obliterating the invaders. Explosions rocked the fleet, sending ships spiraling out of control and crashing into each other. Amidst the destruction, the human soldiers fought with renewed vigor. Every blast, every strike, was a step closer to victory. The Torvaks, desperate and broken, tried to regroup, but it was too late. Their fleet was collapsing, and their empire was crumbling. In the final moments of the battle, Captain Kane stood at the heart of the chaos, watching as the Torvik fleet disintegrated before his eyes. His victory was bittersweet, for he knew that no amount of revenge could bring back the lives lost. But he also knew that humanity had proven something that day. They would never bow to anyone, not even the most advanced alien empire in the galaxy. As the last Torvak ship was destroyed, Kane looked out into the vastness of space. The war was over. Humanity had won, but the cost had been high, and the scars would remain. For the Shadow Legion, this victory was just the beginning. They had survived, and they had triumphed. And now, they would rebuild, stronger than ever. The final showdown had been won, but the journey was far from over. Humanity had proven that, when pushed to the brink, they could rise and fight like no other species in the galaxy. And the Torvaks, they had learned a valuable lesson. Never mess with humans. The final chapter of humanity's war against the Torvaks unfolded like a symphony, each note resonating with the weight of countless sacrifices. The universe had witnessed the rise of an unlikely force, humanity. After years of struggling, surviving, and fighting back against an alien empire that had once thought of them as insignificant, the Torvaks had finally realized the undeniable truth. Humanity could not be defeated. The war was over, but its impact would echo through the galaxy for generations to come. The Torvaks had no choice but to surrender. Their once imposing fleet, now in ruins, was a shadow of its former self. General Vrak, the supreme leader who had so ruthlessly sought to crush humanity, was dead. His empire was in chaos, and the remnants of his forces were scattered and broken. The power of the Torvak military had crumbled, and with it, their resolve. In the heart of this chaos, the human resistance, led by Captain Kane and the Shadow Legion, stood tall. Their victory was not just the defeat of an alien empire. It was the triumph of the human spirit. It was a victory earned through blood, sweat, and tears, a victory that would forever change the course of history. The announcement of their victory spread like wildfire across Earth and beyond. The resistance forces had achieved what many had once thought impossible. The Torvax had been driven from their borders, their fleet shattered, their leadership decimated. It was a moment of celebration, but it was also a moment of solemn reflection. The price of victory had been high. Captain Kane stood before the gathered soldiers of the Shadow Legion, the weight of their victory heavy on his shoulders. The battle was over, but the scars of war would never fade. The faces of fallen comrades flashed in his mind. Those who had fought and died beside him, their sacrifices forever etched into his memory. In that moment, Kane's thoughts turned to Lieutenant Bonner, whose betrayal had cost them so much. Despite the pain of his loss, Kane couldn't help but feel a sense of closure. Bonner's sacrifice had been a turning point, a reminder that even in the darkest times, redemption was possible. The emotional push Bonner's death had given the team had fueled their final push for victory. As Captain Kane looked out over the soldiers who had stood by his side, he realized how far they had come. The Shadow Legion had been forged in the fires of war, but it had emerged stronger and more united than ever. They were no longer just a resistance force. They were the future of humanity. But while the victory was theirs, the work was far from over. The Torvax may have been defeated, but humanity knew that the galaxy was vast and full of threats. They had to prepare for whatever came next. The surrender of the Torvax was a moment of great relief, but it also marked the beginning of a new chapter for Earth. With the remnants of Torvac technology now in their hands, humanity had the opportunity to create something truly remarkable, a defense system unlike any the galaxy had ever seen. Working tirelessly, the brightest minds from Earth's military and scientific communities collaborated to develop an AI-driven defense system that would protect their borders from future invasions. This new system would be powered by the advanced technology they had seized from the Torvax, combining humanity's ingenuity with the power of alien tech. The message was clear: Earth would never be caught off guard again. The Torvax surrender was not a victory just for Earth. It was a warning to every other alien empire that might consider invading. Humanity had shown the galaxy that they were not to be underestimated. They were not helpless, defenseless creatures. Mess with them, and there would be consequences. The Torvax had learned this lesson the hard way, and the rest of the galaxy would soon understand the same. But the victory was bittersweet. For all their triumph, humanity had lost so much in the process. The fallen soldiers, the friends and family who had given their lives in the fight for freedom. There was no bringing them back. The pain of their loss was a constant reminder of the cost of victory. The Shadow Legion's victory had secured Earth's future, but the emotional toll was evident in every soldier's eyes. Their families, their comrades, they had been taken from them by the war. And yet, despite the pain, there was pride. Pride in the resilience they had shown. Pride in the strength they had found in the face of overwhelming odds. As Earth celebrated its victory, Captain Kane stood alone on the balcony of their command ship, gazing out at the stars. The universe seemed so vast, so full of possibilities. The war with the Torvax was over, but the journey was far from finished. Captain Kane knew that humanity's role in the galaxy had only just begun. They had proven themselves capable of overcoming any challenge, no matter how insurmountable. But what came next? What would Earth do with this newfound power? The future was uncertain, but one thing was clear. Humanity was no longer just a small, insignificant species. They had earned their place among the stars. In the distance, the remnants of the Torvac fleet drifted, broken and lifeless. The threat had been eliminated, but the shadow of the war would linger. Earth had emerged victorious, but it had done so at a great cost. The lives lost in the battle, the families torn apart, those sacrifices would never be forgotten. The sun set on a war-torn world, casting long shadows over the land. Yet in the hearts of those who had fought, there was a flicker of hope. Humanity had endured. Humanity had triumphed. And no matter what challenges lay ahead, Earth would stand tall. The last victory had been hard-won, but it had been theirs. And as the universe watched in awe, humanity had made its message clear. Never again would they be underestimated. The Torvax had fallen, and Earth was now a force to be reckoned with. With the power of the Torvax technology in their hands and a new cutting-edge defense system in place, humanity's supremacy in the galaxy was no longer a dream. It was a reality. They had fought for their survival, for their dignity, and for their future. And in the end, they had won. But the victory was not without its scars. As humanity moved forward into this new era, the memories of those lost would guide them. They would never forget the price of freedom. And with that knowledge, they would build a future strong enough to withstand any storm the galaxy could throw at them. The message was clear. Earth had triumphed, and any who dared challenge them would face the consequences. The last victory had been a triumph of the human spirit, a testament to the power of resilience, unity, and hope. Humanity had proven that no matter how dire the circumstances, they would never give up, and that, in the end, was what made them unstoppable.